I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for September the 18th, 2025. We do have some important things we are going to be discussing today, starting with our theology roundup. Over the past several weeks, we have addressed a number of significant passages from both Colossians and Ephesians, discussing what was nailed to the cross, discussing law of commandments contained in ordinances. Last Thursday, we discussed the composition of Colossians, and involved with that is the discussion of whether or not Colossians is a trimmed down version of Ephesians, or if Ephesians is an expanded version of Colossians. Most are in agreement, those who hold to genuine Pauline authorship, as I do, that what we call Ephesians is an expanded version upon Colossians. Now, notice how I said what we call Ephesians, because that's something many people, many lay readers, many people in today's Messianic community are unaware of, who was the original audience of the letter we canonically call Ephesians. Now, our study is taken from our ministry workbook, A Survey of the Holy Scriptures for the Practical Messianic. This was released about a year ago, combining our previous two workbooks, a survey of the Apostolic Scriptures and a survey of the Tanakh. So this effectively is an introduction to the Bible workbook for Messianic people. And it doesn't shy away from different authorship controversies. It doesn't shy away from engaging with liberal theological perspectives. And in the case of Colossians, in the case of Ephesians, not all are agreed that Paul was the genuine author of these letters. I believe Paul was the genuine author of these letters, but not all are agreed. Okay, so let me switch windows really quickly, and then we will examine Ephesians. Okay. All right, there we go. All right, so here we have the entry on Ephesians in a survey of the Holy Scriptures. And as you see from the title, Epistle of Paul called, quote unquote, Ephesians. So I've already interjected something into the conversation many of you are perhaps not aware of. So this functions as a workbook for you to do a personal survey of the Bible yourself, sitting down, and in the case of Ephesians, reading it, hopefully in a single sitting with some kind of a notebook where you keep a journal of different, people, places, key events, key themes, etc. So that's what some of this is you see here. Personal survey of Ephesians, read through the Epistle of Paul called Ephesians, keeping a journal log of people, places, key themes and events, and major scripture passages. conducting a survey of the Bible at one point in your life is doubtlessly one of the most important things you will ever do. All right, so let's get into the theological summary of Ephesians. The approximate date, 60 to 62 CE. The time period, a season of great expansion of the gospel among those needing encouragement. The author, the Apostle Paul, although as I've already stated, not all are in agreement that Paul was the author of Ephesians. I do believe in Pauline authorship of Ephesians. Location of author, Rome, and the target audience in their location, Jewish and non-Jewish believers in Asia Minor and eventually Ephesus. And this actually concerns different approaches to Ephesians 1:1. Okay, so let's get into the theological summary specifically. The letter, which has come to be known as Ephesians, has been traditionally classified among the prison epistles, also including Philippians, Colossians, Philemon. The Epistle of Ephesians has a significant amount of controversy associated with it, as there are issues surrounding its intended audience, its authorship, and among many theologians today, its contents. The authorship of Ephesians is not widely challenged by conservatives, in spite of the fact that the letter lacks a personal greeting. The author plainly identified himself as Paul, Ephesians 1:1, 3:1. And he did indicate how he was in some kind of confinement, Ephesians 4:1, 6:20. While a strong defense has been made in favor of genuine Pauline authorship of Ephesians, most liberal theologians today deny that Paul wrote this letter. Was the Apostle Paul the author of the Epistle of Ephesians? The letter was known to various Christian leaders by the end of the 1st century and early 2nd century, such as Clement of Rome, Ignatius, Hermas, and Polycarp, requiring Ephesians to have been written by the late 1st century. Explicit Pauline authorship is attested by the late 2nd century, as Irenaeus would testify. The blessed Paul declares in his epistle to the Ephesians that we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. Ephesians 5:30. Against heresies 5:2-3. Claims against genuine Pauline authorship of Ephesians have been present in New Testament studies since the 19th century. Those who doubt that Paul was the author of Ephesians tend to claim that some of the letter's theological themes and various terms employed are not witnessed in the agreed upon genuine Pauline letters. But if the Apostle Paul was not the author of Ephesians, then who was it? Those who deny Pauline authorship of Ephesians might propose that someone in Paul's inner circle, like Onesimus or Luke, composed it sometime after his death. Generally, among liberals, though, one finds the view that some kind of anonymous members of a Pauline school, a collection of second-generation believers wanting to honor the apostle and his legacy, wrote this letter in his honor to preserve his teaching legacy. Some liberals who deny Pauline authorship of Ephesians are keen to point out that this does not mean abandoning the letter's theological and spiritual value. Victor Paul Furnish, perhaps surprisingly, has to admit, quote, at least in a general way, the overall structure of Ephesians conforms to that of the other letters in the Pauline corpus, unquote. Anchor Bible Dictionary. Those who would affirm genuine Pauline authorship of Ephesians would take issue with the claims that the theological themes of the letter are too unique to be from the apostle, as well as the idea that the employment of various terms places the letter outside of the apostle's composition ability. Those supporting genuine Pauline authorship of Ephesians draw the attention of readers to the kind of epistle Ephesians was intended to be, and how some unique vocabulary would needed to have been employed for the circumstances the author intended to address. Quote, the versatility of Paul himself is obvious enough from his acknowledged writings and is broad enough to accommodate the rich theology of Ephesians, unquote, from I. Howard Marshall's in Erdman's commentary of the Bible. In Marshall's dialoguing with a somewhat liberal audience in Erdman's commentary on the Bible, he actually calls the author of Ephesians Paul, or quote-unquote Paul, in quotation marks. A sound case when evaluating the positions of liberals who deny genuine Pauline authorship of Ephesians can be made for genuine Pauline authorship, as the arguments against its themes or vocabulary coming from the apostle himself are not as strong as purported. Now, listen to this part, because this is something which I know, based on my Messianic experience over the years, many of you have probably never heard before. Who was the audience of Ephesians? Going by what most readers of the letter tend to encounter, excuse me, it is to be historically recognized that ancient Ephesus became the third most important city for the early Messianic community after Jerusalem and Antioch. Ephesus was a major emporium and urban center in the Eastern Roman Empire, standing on the most direct sea and land route to the eastern provinces. It was a major center of Artemis or Diana worship, boasting a huge temple. The early Messianic community established a major presence in Ephesus, so significant that it was one of the assemblies which Yeshua directed a word to in the book of Revelation. In the epistles of 1st and 2nd Timothy, one witnesses how Paul's disciple Timothy served the Ephesian believers with great care. Okay, now listen up very carefully. Not enough laypersons are actually aware of the significant debate, even among conservatives who accept genuine Pauline authorship, and that would be me. I accept genuine Pauline authorship, as to who the target audience of the epistle entitled Ephesians really was. When encountering Ephesians 1:1 in the Revised Standard Version, for example, so if you have an RSV, open it up, crack it open. One reads, Ephesians 1:1, RSV, Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God, to the saints who were also faithful in Christ Jesus. The words "and Epheso" are missing from the oldest manuscripts. Noting that "in Ephesus" was not present in some of the earliest copies of the letter, as well as seeing that the author was not too personally acquainted with the audience. Ephesians 1:15, 3:2, 4:21, which seems strange considering that Paul spent 3 years in Ephesus. Acts 20, verse 31. There have been various propositions as to what the purpose of Ephesians was. As Marshall notes, quote, it remains curiously impersonal and general in its contents, so that it's very difficult to pick up any clues that would enable us to reconstruct the situation and the identity of the recipients, unquote. Erdman's commentary on the Bible. While there are conservatives, again, listen carefully, who will argue that the epistle of Ephesians was written to the Ephesians proper, there are many others who would argue instead that the letter, which would become known as Ephesians, was actually a general epistle written by Paul to congregations in Asia Minor. The oldest Greek copies of Ephesians actually have a blank space where in Ephesus appears in later copies, giving support to the idea that Paul's courier Tychicus, Ephesians 6:21, could have carried this letter to various assemblies and then written their name in this space. Quote, "It is widely held that Ephesians, designated as a circular, was written at the same time as Colossians and Philemon and was probably taken to various churches in the province of Asia by Tychicus," unquote, from Donald Guthrie's New Testament introduction. D.A. Carson and Douglas J. Moo further describe how, quote, "Perhaps the best form of the circular letter theory is that which sees Paul as having sent such a letter with Tychicus when he sent Colossians, and that the letter was copied and circulated from Ephesus. Since it was a circular, there would be a blank instead of the name of the recipients, but the letter would be known to be associated with Ephesus, and in time that name was attached to it," unquote. From there, an introduction to the New Testament. Viewing the letter called Ephesians as originally an epistle to various assemblies of Messiah followers in Asia Minor would have been something which eventually made its way to Ephesus. The Ephesians could have been one in a series of intended audiences for the letter, and that is why the letter did come to be known as Ephesians. Yet, given its rather broad theological tones, Paul's visit to Ephesus in Acts can, at most, be used as indirect background material. Ephesus does play a role in understanding Ephesians, but only in a general or indirect sense. Also important to keep in mind is how viewing the letter, now called Ephesians, as a general epistle written to assemblies in Asia Minor, could very well answer the question of what letter Paul sent to Laodicea, which was to be read to the Colossians, Colossians 4:16. While some have searched endlessly for a non-extant epistle to the Laodiceans, such a letter coming from Laodicea could very well have been the general epistle, which came to be known as Ephesians. Okay, so I'm sure some of you have probably never heard the idea, even though if you have a study Bible worth the paper it's printed on, you're going to see a footnote for Ephesians 1:1, and Ephesus is missing from the oldest manuscripts. You've got versions like the RSV, 1952 Revised Standard Version. They don't even have in Ephesus. Various other specialty translations of the New Testament will not include in Ephesus in Ephesians 1:1. What we call Ephesians, because of the blank space appearing in the oldest manuscripts, was likely a general epistle to believers in Asia Minor, which could have originated from Ephesus, but certainly made its way to Ephesus. And because of the importance of Ephesus to the first century ecclesia, certainly second century ecclesia, the tradition of Ephesian preservation stuck. But what should cause anyone to question whether the Ephesians proper were the audiences, Paul spent 3 years in Ephesus, and in this letter, he acts like he doesn't know his audience. That's what leads some to conclude that Paul wasn't the author, and this is a later generation, second or third generation composition meant to honor Paul. If you accept genuine Pauline authorship, as I do, what we call Ephesians was a general epistle to believers in Asia Minor. And in fact, with that in mind, it was most probably the letter which was sent to Laodicea, which was to be read to the Colossians. So rather than speaking of the audience of Ephesians as the Ephesians proper, we speak of it as assemblies in Asia Minor. That is well on the map of conservative Bible scholarship. Okay. It is undeniable that the Epistle of Ephesians and the Epistle to the Colossians have some kind of a relationship, as there is a great deal of overlap often witnessed between the themes of the two letters. Ephesians 1:4, paralleling Colossians 1:22, Ephesians 1:7, Colossians 1:14 and 20, Colossians 1:15 and 16, paralleling Colossians 1:4-9, Ephesians 3:1 through 5, paralleling Colossians 1:25 to 27, Ephesians 3:9, paralleling Colossians 1:26, Ephesians 4:2, paralleling Colossians 3:12, Ephesians 4:31 and 32, paralleling Colossians 3:8, 12, Ephesians 5:19 and 20, paralleling Colossians 3:16 and 17, Ephesians 6:21 and 22, paralleling Colossians 4:7 and 8. If one accepts genuine Pauline authorship of both Ephesians and Colossians, then Ephesians and Colossians being written at around the same time is probable. There are some scholars who consider Colossians to be authentically Pauline, but Ephesians to not be. Colossians was used then as a basis for Ephesians as a second-generation doctrinal piece. Was Ephesians written first and then being compressed into Colossians? Or was Ephesians a more expanded and generalized version of Colossians? More expositors tend to favor Ephesians being written after Colossians. Donald Guthrie details. Okay, Ephesians being written after Colossians. Okay, quote, "The close connection between this epistle and Colossians has a direct bearing on its purpose. The same themes are dealt with, although in a modified way. It seems probable that the apostle, with the positive doctrine of the Colossian letter still in his mind, wrote it down again in a general way without the specific background of the heresy," unquote, from his New Testament introduction. Carson and Moo also observe, "It is not unreasonable to think of Paul as producing Colossians with a specific situation in mind, and not long after, as writing Ephesians with broader purposes. It is also possible that he made use of an amanuensis and allowed him some freedom in one or another of the letters," unquote, from an introduction to the New Testament. What's an amanuensis? An amanuensis is a professional secretary who would have been employed for the composition of Colossians, Ephesians, etc. And by the way, if, for example, Tychicus, if he was the amanuensis or secretary who helped compose Ephesians for the Apostle Paul, co-authorship of a letter is completely different than authorship a generation or two after Paul's death. C.E. Arnold, Clinton E. Arnold, astutely directs, quote, "The precise nature of the relationship between Ephesians and Colossians continues to stand in need of careful research from a literary, linguistic, and theological perspective," unquote. Dictionary of Paul and his letters. At the very least, readers of both Ephesians and Colossians may find clarification on an issue from additional statements made in either letter. The traditional place of Ephesians' composition is regarded as being Rome, likely between 60 to 62 CE. A few think that a fair case can be made for Paul actually being imprisoned in Ephesus itself, but this would require an earlier dating. No case for a Hebrew or Aramaic origin of this letter has ever been made by either conservative or liberal examiners. Given the likely Roman origin of the letter and a Greek-speaking audience encompassing parts of Asia Minor in the vicinity of Ephesus, a Greek composition of the letter is definite. However, simply because the letter was written in Greek does not mean that it should be separated from its Jewish Pauline context. Quote, "Although the Old Testament quotations in Ephesians are not numerous, there are many allusions evidenced by the author's dependence on Old Testament phraseology, terminology, and concepts," unquote. Arnold from Dictionary of Paul and His Letters. The Epistle of Ephesians is sometimes described as having a meditative quality. Robert Gundry. It is also observed that, quote, Colossians has has in it the intensity, rush, and war of the battlefield, while Ephesians is a calm atmosphere suggestive of a survey of the field after the victory. Unquote. New International Dictionary of the Bible. Ephesians emphasizes the final authority and supremacy of the Messiah Yeshua, Ephesians 1:10-22, but also his grand service for believers via his atoning sacrifice, Ephesians 2:16, 5:25. The letter has no specific false teaching in mind to address, even though some connections may be seen to the Colossian false teaching. Ephesians focuses on important themes such as the fulfilled life believers have in Yeshua, Ephesians 1:1, the mystery of God's people fully understood in Yeshua, Ephesians 3:1-6, and the different spiritual gifts God has given to each, Ephesians 4:1-16. Paul also discussed the proper balance of believers' personal lives and their relationships with others, specifically in the context of marriage, Ephesians 4:17-6:9. There are various parts of the Epistle of Ephesians which are understandably quite important for today's evangelical Protestants. Sections which uplift the supremacy of Yeshua the Messiah and the great reconciliation to the Father, which people are to experience in him as Savior, are obviously most significant. Also key for today's body of Messiah are noting a respect for its diversity, as born-again believers have each been given a variety of gifts, talents, and skills which are to benefit everyone. Ephesians 4:4-6, 11-13. A great amount of discussion and debate, though, over the family instruction, Ephesians 5:21-6:4, given, has been witnessed in the past 2 to 3 decades among complementarians and egalitarians, as Paul appeared to deliberately subvert some ancient Greco-Roman and Jewish views of the sexes in the first century Mediterranean. This particularly concerns the concept of mutual submission of believers to each other, Ephesians 5:21-30, and what the term kephale, or head, meant, Ephesians 5:23, as either authority or source. If the latter is to be preferred, then it definitely implies that husbands are to treat their wives with a great deal of respect, like their own bodies, Ephesians 5:28, as woman came from man. Those in the Messiah are to regard themselves as incorporating a one new humanity, Ephesians 2:15, New Revised Standard Complete Jewish Bible, today's New International Version, which has emerged as a direct result of his sacrificial work. It is worth noting that throughout much of post-Reformation history, various Protestant traditions, particularly the Reformed tradition, have not looked at Ephesians 2:15 as abolishing the Mosaic law in its entirety, but instead just the so-called ceremonial law. A correct interpretation of this will take into consideration what the barrier of the dividing wall, Ephesians 2:14, New American Standard, actually represented for an ancient first century audience. And we actually addressed that a few weeks ago on Messianic Insider. So you can go and look at the back episode. For Messianic people today, the Epistle of Ephesians is often highly valued. Paul expresses the unity which Jewish and non-Jewish people are to have in Messiah Yeshua as a part of the commonwealth of Israel. Ephesians 2:11-13, 3:6. Anything which unnecessarily separated these two distinct groups of human beings should be regarded as inoperative in him. Yet, in much of the contemporary Messianic movement, what such a commonwealth of Israel represents has been debated. There are struggles witnessed as to what the one new humanity actually is and what was abolished by Yeshua's sacrifice. Ephesians 2:15, if this was not the Torah of Moses. Few of today's Messianics are that well informed or even aware of the discussions in evangelical Protestantism over mutual submission in the home and some rightful criticisms of what has been commonly termed male headship. We discussed that earlier on an episode of Messianic Insider. While Ephesians is a highly regarded text of the apostolic scriptures by many Messianics, There is much room for improvement, and more detailed examination will need to take place in the future. Okay, and to just scroll down a little bit, in the Survey of the Holy Scriptures workbook, we've got questions for reflection on Ephesians. So there are 4 really large questions which you get to reflect on, and then reflection on the place of Ephesians in the Holy Scriptures. Write 2 short paragraphs about what struck you about reading Paul's letter of Ephesians. Okay, so that concludes our theology review for today. And I want to apologize that at first it seemed, from what I can tell here on StreamYard, it can seem that the broadcast was a little sluggish. Some of you all probably know that the Mac OS just released a new update. So I think that, because I upgraded it last night, I think Mac OS 26 Tahoe is we're still trying to sort through some things with this. So just apologize about that. Okay, so let's switch screens back. Okay, there we go. Yes, this teaching came from our ministry workbook, a survey of the Holy Scriptures for the practical Messianic. And we'll certainly have some more of these sessions where we go through the composition and importance of a biblical text. Definitely with a new Torah cycle starting in a little over a month, it would be my intention to, when Genesis starts, do Genesis, Exodus starts, do Exodus, etc. But you don't have to wait to get the workbook. All right, so let's move over to our news roundup. We always do the news roundup after the theology roundup because, of course, the news is time sensitive. Everything changes from day to day. Number 1, we got to be praying for peace in the Middle East. Israel, Gaza, the whole situation, that's getting more complicated. Number 2, we got to be praying for peace between Russia, Ukraine. Pray that sanity prevails. And of course, number 3, we got to be praying for reason, sanity to prevail here on the American home front. Still sorting through the tragic death of Charlie Kirk. We've got things like Russiagate, Epstein, etc. we got to sort through. So yeah, these are definitely problems here on the home front. And we've got the fall high holidays coming up. And with the fall high holidays, Monday evening, we'll be remembering Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets. There's a lot of speculation regarding the rapture. Of course, that day is going to come and go, but this is a time we do need to be seeking the Lord. We've got to be pressing into him, and we have to really be on guard as to when we are in history, because there are a lot of changes which are going to be occurring at a breakneck speed in the next few years, even to our Messianic faith community. And along with that, how prepared are we? All right, so all the news stories I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived at MessianicApologetics.net. You can go check out the articles, look at the clips, etc. All right, our first story. Some of you all are aware of the different conspiracy theories which are coming out about the death of Charlie Kirk. And of course, a really big one is that Israel did it. Israel's agents are behind it. So the New York Post picked up on this, picked up on some of this. This is from the New York Post yesterday. Bill Ackman on Tuesday night published private text messages with Charlie Kirk, including an invitation he extended to the slain conservative activists. Do dinner sometime with the ladies to swat down what he called slanderous claims by Candace Owens that he staged a Hamptons intervention to blackmail Kirk over Israel. And here, the very first comment is, no one believes the New York Post. So, yes, there are definitely people out there who are claiming that the Jews, Israel, is behind the death of Charlie Kirk. And this is something which, guess what? Whether we like it or not, it affects us in the Messianic community. Rather than be ignorant of this, we've got to at least be aware of this so it doesn't broadside us should someone bring it up. Okay, to the Middle East. From open source intel, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia signed a strategic mutual defense agreement during Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's visit. Okay, so some people are understandably very concerned that Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, was it in response to Israel attacking Hamas headquarters in Qatar? Is this just rubber stamping an arrangement Saudi Arabia and Pakistan already had? What is concerning about Saudi Arabia, Pakistan forming a mutual defense treaty? Basically, if you attack one, it's as though you've attacked the other. Is that Pakistan has nuclear weapons. And could this mean that Pakistan's nuclear weapons could be transferred to Saudi Arabia? What does that do to the Middle East? I mean, this is why this is concerning to a lot of people, and justifiably so. I mean, we've never really seen, because Pakistan is a South Asian country more than it is a Middle Eastern country, although it's Muslim. We've never really seen it get embroiled in the Israel-Palestinian issue. We've never seen it really get embroiled in, the Middle East peace process. But now, right, I mean, what's going on? Okay, our next story, and this is something which is encouraged to pass along from Dahlia Kurtz on X. Here you see a 23-second clip. This is from 2018, I believe. Originally, Charlie Kirk, of course. We were in Israel a couple weeks ago. It is not the most amazing place. Excuse me, is it not the most amazing place? He's Netanyahu special. He's a special leader, and he's everything a leader should be. So here you've got Charlie Kirk visiting Israel, praising Israel. He loved Israel. He loved Netanyahu. And guess who he's with? Candace Owens. So Dahlia Kurtz concludes, another video they don't want you to see. Share it. Okay, so I said I might be experiencing some issues with the new version of the Mac OS. How sluggish is this, broadcast today? But here, of course, we see Microsoft to retire Windows 10 support ends in October 2025. That is right on your doorstep. The company announced it will stop servicing all versions of Windows 10 on October 14th, 2025. Now, I remember all the way back in 2015 that upgrading to Windows 10 certainly was offered free for many computers. And along with that, some people woke up one morning and they had seen that most probably Windows 7, possibly the disaster known as Windows 8, that they saw that, oh my goodness, I've got Windows 10 on my computer and I didn't even know it was going to upgrade. So along with that, here we see Windows 10, which I think more computers have used, perhaps more than any others. I know that we run a hybrid office here, Outreach Israel Messianic Apologetics. We've got Windows 10, Windows 11. We've also got Mac. Mac is to be preferred. But along with that, we have got machines which we've got to be aware of. which will no longer be using Windows 10. At least not an updated Windows 10 with all of the necessary security features. All right, from open source Intel Defender yesterday, September the 17th, Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara told reporters tonight in Damascus that ongoing security negotiations with Israel could lead to results in the coming days. With this following reports of a tripartite agreement this week between Syria, Jordan, and the United States regarding the security situation in Suwaida, southern Syria, where fighting between Israeli-backed Druze militias and the Syrian army, as well as local tribal militias, has been ongoing since July. Okay, so yeah, we've got a lot of outstanding questions regarding Syria, but this Druze situation and wanting to see it resolved, that is hopefully something which can bring a resolution to some of this and some kind of an eventual peace between Israel and Syria. Okay, so here's a post from X-Channel Defense Intelligence, and there's about a 1-minute clip. Arab NATO versus Western NATO, because from the summit in Doha, Qatar, with all those Arab and Islamic states, there's a suggestion that the Arab and Islamic world need to form some kind of NATO alliance, NATO-style alliance. The Doha summit exposed Arab anger at Israel strikes. Egypt suggested a NATO-style force. Pakistan backed an Arab-Islamic alliance. Gulf states eyed joint defense, while Iran called for direct retaliation. The idea faces big hurdles, but could change the Middle East security forever. What if it actually happens? And so, no surprise at all why some people are thinking in terms of the end times and prophecy and everything else when they see this kind of thing. From open source intel yesterday evening, September the 17th, the Pentagon is reviewing social media posts by U.S. service members after Charlie Kirk's assassination, following warnings against mocking or praising his death. At least one Marine officer has been removed from recruiting duties pending an investigation, and 5 Army officers plus an Army Reserve officer are suspended during a review of their social media activity. Yes, be very, very careful if you work for the government, and not just as military, but even as a civilian. And that may not necessarily be the federal government, even state government, local government. Be careful what you say on social media. Yeah, especially, don't be seen praising the death of any human being, no matter how much you may have disagreed with them. That's just pretty shameful. All right, so moving on to the next one. Speaking of people responding to Charlie Kirk, many of you are aware of this. The New York Post yesterday, September the 17th, Jimmy Kimmel is taking an involuntary hiatus. ABC has announced that it is pulling the comedian's late-night talk show off the air indefinitely, following the host's controversial comments about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I got to be honest, I really haven't watched Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert. Here's another one. This is from Fox News from yesterday. Disney is pulling Jimmy Kimmel's late night show off air indefinitely after Kimmel ignited a firestorm over his comments about the alleged Charlie Kirk assassin. All right, so moving on to back to the Middle East from open source intel. This is from yesterday, September the 17th. There's a 16-second clip. People forget how dangerous Hamas was just last year. And you see all these rockets. They were able to fire dozens of rockets at Tel Aviv. And of course, looking at the situation today, unbelievable achievement. Yeah, Hamas is not what it was. So people need to remember that. In spite of the fact that, yes, this conflict has been going on for almost 2 years now, The nations of the world have broadly gotten impatient toward Israel and this ongoing situation. Remember what was going on a mere year ago. Be able to look at this situation over long spaces of time. All right. Here's here's a story from Breitbart yesterday on Instagram. Senate Majority GOP leader John Thune told Breitbart News exclusively that unfortunately Democrats on the radical left have allowed the normalization of violent behavior in furtherance of their agenda, as evidenced by the many Democrats celebrating the tragic assassination of conservative leader Charlie Kirk. Now, yesterday, we actually concluded our episode of Messianic Insider, noting how former President Obama did condemn the death of Charlie Kirk. He did condemn this, and he issued proper sympathies for his family. So, are all Democrats responsible? No, not at all. But this is a huge wake-up call for our society, that we need to learn, perhaps relearn how to talk with one another, how to have open conversations, and how to not be so offended when controversial issues are brought up. Okay, whether you like Lance Wallnau or not, I did think this was important to pass on. This is from yesterday, where he says, "It grieves me to see voices like Candace Owens drifting into dangerous conspiracies and claiming that Israel is somehow tied to Charlie Kirk's death. That's not discernment, that's deception. Charlie stood firmly for truth, and he never turned Israel into the villain." Okay, now this is where the Bible says in Genesis 12:3, "I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you." When Christians give airtime to lies, they just don't confuse the body of Christ. Okay, now one of the things which Wallnau did correctly here is he condemned those who were trying to associate Israel with Charlie Kirk's death. But here, of course, he trots out Genesis 12:3, which is the canned line many people use in order to support Israel and support the Jewish people. I'm not saying that that is an incorrect verse to turn to, but we know in the Messianic community, we've got to have a much better, thorough, more detailed case for the support of Israel. I've said it before, 2 Corinthians 8 would be a great place to start. The interconnectivity and the interdependence Jewish and non-Jewish believers have in kingdom matters. We don't hear that a lot. We don't even hear that a lot in the Messianic community because it would imply some degree of real great equality between Jewish and non-Jewish believers. But we're going to have to, as we look into the future, have a much more robust defense against replacement theology and supersessionism. I posted on X, tweeted in the old verbiage yesterday how I've got an open file on a multi-year project, but it's also dependent on some of the things we are going to witness over the next few years with, rising anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Judaism, etc. Okay, regarding the situation, India, Pakistan, this is from yesterday, open source intel. A senior Saudi official said the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Pact reflects their long-standing cooperation and isn't tied to any specific event. Okay, some of us may disagree with this and think that, you just had Israel bomb Hamas headquarters in Qatar. You just had that big summit in Doha where one of the proposals was to create some kind of an Arab Islamic version of NATO. Is this really just rubber stamping agreements or understandings Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have already had? I'm not so convinced. But it is concerning. Okay, this is important to pass along. Visegrad 24. China is opening a new route via the Northern Sea route. According to Politico, China is beginning tests of a new maritime shipping route through the Northern Sea route. And here, of course, you see how vessels will travel from China through the North Pole all the way to Europe. And, I know that earlier in the year when Donald Trump took the presidency, there was a lot of debate about, Canada as the 51st state and the U.S. wanting to annex Greenland. And, I don't believe any of that is ever going to happen. I believe that a president like Trump uses these as negotiating tactics in order to get the best deal for America. But the reason is, among others, Greenland sits along one of these northern, trade routes, along one of these northern routes where vessels are going to travel now to and from Asia, whether they're going to North America, the Eastern Seaboard, whether they're going to Europe. And does the United States want a China or a Russia to have, broad hegemony over these routes? Of course not. So there are some reasons, whether you agree with Trump's rhetoric or not, for him wanting to have or had Canada as the 51st state, Greenland as annexed, and all that. There are reasons behind it. Okay, our next story. Okay, this is from Open Source Intel earlier this morning, September the 18th. Okay, so some of you all, we've talked about this, we've reported on this, how the United Arab Emirates threatening to change its relationship with Israel should Israel choose to exert control over the West Bank, i.e. Judea and Samaria. So here we see Reuters, the United Arab Emirates will not fully cut ties with Israel if it moves to declare sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, but it would scale them back, potentially recalling its ambassador. Of course, we know these are the kinds of things which can change from day to day. Okay, so let's go to our next story. Only have a few more left. Okay, from I-24 News. And this is an indication of how things definitely can change from day to day. In audio obtained by I-24 News, Macron, the French president, says, "I will not recognize a Palestinian state without the release of the hostages." And of course, here the report is France flip-flops on Palestinian recognition. Now we know, given the news cycle, given the way events can take place and events can change, that this is all subjective. Things can definitely change. Okay. Next news story from Visegrad 24. You can read this in greater detail later. North Korea gets almost nothing from cooperation with Russia. And this is from September the 18th. And it talks about how it's estimated that North Korea's deliveries since 2023 are at 5 to 6 to 9.8 billion, a number of different weapons. Russia supplies far more modest, worth no more than 1.2 billion. That's US dollars. So, yeah, why is North Korea involved in the conflict in Ukraine? I don't know. Is North Korea trying to feel important? Yeah, of course, we know that certainly from the recent parade in Beijing commemorating the end of the Second World War, you had Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, as well as Kim Jong-un. And along with that, people have been speculating about the formation of some kind of an Eastern Bloc, a new Eastern Bloc to counterbalance Europe and America, the Western Bloc, right? But how much is that, Eastern Bloc really united? How much is really coming from it? Okay. So here we have from Visegrad 24. Putin stated that there are over 700,000 troops currently on the front line in Ukraine. This is from September the 18th, 2025. Okay, so what is the deal with this? Why does Russia have so many troops in Ukraine, or on the front line in Ukraine? What is Russia thinking? There are a lot of different opinions, all of them not so good, circulating in analysis minds right now. Okay, so we know that President Trump has presently just ended a state visit to the United Kingdom. Here's a clip of where he was in a press conference with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Trump said that Putin let him down. The US president admitted he thought the war in Ukraine would be the easiest to resolve thanks to his personal relationship with Putin. But according to Trump, the Russian leader really let him down. Yes, that's exactly what I think as well. There were so many high hopes after the summit in Alaska that this was going to be taken care of. And of course, that is not what happened. Okay, we got 3 more stories. From Vivid on X, breaking, Japan refuses to recognize a Palestinian state. Oh, there's the F word in somebody's comment. So we'll move on to the next one. Okay, but that's good. From Open Source Intel, also, Trump reacts to the UK's decision to recognize a Palestinian state. And according to the president, there's a 1-minute, 4-second clip here. We have to remember October the 7th, one of the worst, most violent days in the history of the world. I want an end. I want the hostages released. I have a disagreement with the prime minister on that score. One of our few disagreements, actually. Okay, and of course, we will wait and see when different representatives go to the United Nations later, just in about a week or so, how much or how little we will see of Palestinian statehood recognition. And our final story, this is involved with the Charlie Kirk assassination. Officially from Turning Point USA, the Turning Point board has unanimously elected Erica Kirk as the new CEO and chair of the board. In prior discussions, Charlie expressed to multiple executives that this is what he wanted in the event of his death. So Charlie Kirk's widow is going to take over Turning Point USA, it appears. Now, I, of course, don't have an issue with that. I believe in strong women and strong men, and Erica Kirk, from what I've been able to make of her, is a very strong woman. But given the fact that there are a lot of really strong conservative, traditionalist types involved with Turning Point USA, is this possibly going to be something which makes Turning Point fracture because you see a woman in a position of leadership? And there are a lot of people who are involved with Turning Point who believe that a woman's place is solely in the home to raise children. We'll wait and see. But we do know that the tragic death of Charlie Kirk is going to influence a lot of people to speak out, to speak their minds, to make a difference. That, I think, is undeniable at this point. All right, so that concludes our news roundup. And I do apologize if the video is a little choppy. Again, there's a brand new version of the Mac OS, so maybe there needs to be some things that get smoothed over in the next few broadcasts. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not already, I encourage you to go to our website, my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a number of free articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News. You can check out some back episodes of Messianic Insider, McKee Moment Shorts, and look into a lot of our other adventures over the years. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Shalom, and take care.